Hey, everybody, welcome to the briefing room on this Thursday. I'm ABC's Devin Dwyer in Washington with our political director, Rick Klein. Great to have Rick here with us on a very busy day up on Capitol Hill. Finally, on day 34 of the government shutdown, the Congress is actually taking some votes to try to reopen the government. They didn't go very far, Rick.
You can see the light at the end of the tunnel, but you have to really squint to make it out.
Some glimmers of hope, maybe.
It's weird that in Washington sometimes failed votes move you forward. There's an old saying that sometimes you have to show people what they can't be told in Congress, and that's, I think, what's going on the Senate floor today. So even though these are failing, and even though just yesterday we have this big row where the Speaker of the House disinvites the president, that actually might be what's necessary to clear things out, clarify things, and I think we're shaping up into a big weekend of negotiations and maybe a big week next week.
A pressure valve release, if you will. Let's bring in Trish Turner. She's our senior Senate producer who's tracking the breaking developments right now. Trish, bring us up to speed. There were two measures, two different plans, a Democratic plan, a Republican plan. Both went down. So everybody's asking, what now?
So not quite ready to call the second one just yet, but you're absolutely on track with it going down, most likely. I was actually quite interested in the second one. So the first one that encompasses the president's proposal, the Republican plan, as you called it, that went down. 57, largely along party lines, 51-47. Two Republicans voted against it. They're immigration hardliners, so it wasn't strong enough. They're in that amnesty camp because it gives protections for dreamers. So those two senators we can kind of put on the sidelines. Only one Democrat voted for that, Joe Manchin of West Virginia. We know where he stands. And so on the Democratic proposal that's up right now, I was just counting my list. I have at least probably six, possibly 5 or 6 Republicans who voted for it. That's kind of striking. You only have to get to 60. They have 47 Democrats, so we're inching a little closer. Republicans are fed up. And so notable on that list aren't just our moderates, but Johnny Isakson voted for it. Lamar Alexander, these are institutionalists. They would tend to be tired of the shutdown. Let's move on with it. And they were talking like that in the hallways. And now they've actually given a vote to that particular position. So that's interesting. So we're seeing glimmers of hope. And like Rick said, I mean, he's covered, we covered Congress together years ago. That sometimes you really do need to see like fantastic failure before you can even get people off the sidelines to start talking, because this is highly politically charged environment, and Donald Trump in the White House is making it much harder for these Republicans to move off their position.
And even though they're not technically talking, Trish, Rick, we did start to see some indications that at least Democrats may be moving here. Some reporting from our Ben Siegel up on Capitol Hill that Nancy Pelosi, House Democratic leadership, actually are going to put on paper what they want to do for border security, maybe even as much as $5.7 billion. It's the president's number for border security, but still no wall, no concrete wall.
They won't call it a wall, but clearly, as Democrats have conceded, publicly and privately both, there are parts of the border where a wall makes sense. They've done it in the past. They would do it again. Now, it's a little tricky because Nancy Pelosi said it's a moral issue when it comes to the wall. I think she's referring to the president's version of a wall on the entire border. That is where there's just a dead set opposition. Democrats aren't going to do that. But will they do something that the president's able to point to and say, hey, I got my wall? That sounds likely.
Perhaps. So some movement there as well. Let's bring Jordan Phelps into this. She's over at the White House. Jordan, as the kicker to all this, caught up in the shutdown debate has been the State of the Union address. It was scheduled for Tuesday, and it's now looking like the president has at least ceded a little bit to Nancy Pelosi and said, okay, fine, I won't give my speech on Tuesday night. What are you hearing from officials over there about that decision?
Yeah, Devin, in a late night tweet last night, the president said he's not going to try to go forward with this anymore because of Nancy Pelosi. He also noted in there that he hopes to deliver the speech soon once the shutdown is over. So maybe a glimmer of hope that the president at least isn't counting on this to go on forever. But Devin, at the end of the day, this is a president who loves a good visual. And that visual was stolen from him, at least for now, by Nancy Pelosi. And so he capitulated in this particular case. Devin, we had been hearing that the president was preparing 2 versions of a speech, one to give on Capitol Hill and one to give somewhere else in the country. Clearly, that second alternative speech has been scrapped at this point since he now just wants to give the speech in Congress. We have been pushing officials for any other plans the president might take on for Tuesday now that he won't be giving the State of the Union address, Devin. But for right now, there are no plans on the books.
Okay, Jordan, thanks so much for that. Stand by. Meanwhile, we're headed towards the second missed paycheck by those 800,000 federal workers tomorrow. That's the second payday on the books that they won't get paid as this drags on. I want to bring in one of those federal workers now from New Jersey, but joining us from New York, Carson Mata is an EPA official who is involved with the Superfund cleanup sites around the country. Carson, great to have you. Thanks for coming in. So give us a sense of how hard financially the shutdown, this 30-day shutdown now, has been on you and your family.
Well, thank you for having me. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here and to share my story and to give this shutdown kind of a voice. There has been a real hardship on me, not just me, but a lot of my colleagues too. I've said it before, I feel very fortunate to have the friends and family that I do. They've made me feel very comfortable and feel like I'm in a place where I'm going to be okay. But I know that's not the case for a lot of other Americans out there that are struggling through this.
So many families we've heard from here, and I know you've been in touch with many of your colleagues, struggling just to put food on the table, really. Many federal workers work paycheck to paycheck. The average weekly pay for one union tells us is about $500 a week for some of the lower end jobs, at least here in Washington, around the country. You started a social media fundraising effort to help some of your peers. You were telling us you raised about $5,000 for that. Tell us what you did with the money.
I did. So I was really inspired by a shutdown social that was put on in Montgomery County, Maryland, and it was hosted by a local councilman in Maryland, and he basically partnered with a school and said, we're going to have this shutdown social for federal employees, contractors, and their families, and everyone is welcome. If you're not a federal employee, just bring a dish, and you can come and socialize. And really, that inspired me to kind of do my own shutdown social in New Jersey, and we just had an amazing event on Tuesday night where we fed between 75 and 100 federal employees and their families, and federal contractors came out as well. That money went toward, the food for the event, and we were able to buy ShopRite gift cards and Amazon gift cards, and each family got at least one or two of those as they were walking out the door. A lot of folks brought their young children and had expressed, that this was a really difficult time for them. Although it was a really nice effort, it was just one night for them, and there are still bills to pay and children to take care of. So there's a lot more to be done.
Really nice to see, and inspiring for sure to see neighbors helping neighbors, and quite an effort that you put together there. I want to get your reaction to a comment earlier today that's creating a lot of waves around the country from Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross, who addressed some of the needs from these families to seek food, to put food on their table. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Sure.
We've had shutdowns before, albeit for not such a long period as we've been thus far. But put it in perspective, you're talking about 800,000 workers, and while I feel sorry for the individuals that have hardship cases, 800,000 workers, if they never got their pay, which is not the case, they will eventually get it, but if they never got it, you're talking about 1/3% on our GDP. So it's not like it's a gigantic number overall.
Mr. Secretary, but Mr. Secretary, there are reports that there are some federal workers who are going to homeless shelters to get food.
Well, I know they are, and I don't really quite understand why.
So your response to that, Carson?
It's absolutely out of touch, that perspective, and it's actually really, it's hurtful to hear that from someone that's supposed to be a leader for our nation. There's a real human cost, and I was able to sit face to face with those people on Tuesday night at my event, and read stories where they're accounting firsthand what the struggles are. It's a position of privilege to sit somewhere and say that you don't understand the hardships of others. Not everyone is so fortunate to be able to borrow money from family or friends. Some people are out here winging it on their own. And it's disheartening to hear that leadership doesn't quite understand how other people could be in a different position than the privilege that they're used to.
Yeah, and I want to get, and before we let you go, I want to get your take on that core point that he was making, and we've heard from many people in the White House that the president did sign that bill that will secure back pay for you and all the workers who are off work. Wilbur Ross and several other officials today made this point that, look, there is pain right now, there is sacrifice right now, no doubt. But at the end of the day, you're actually guaranteed all that money coming back. What do you say to that? Does it soften the blow at all?
It softens the blow in the sense that, yes, we will be able to, catch up with that money that we'll get back. But there's a little asterisk there. Federal contractors are not going to receive that back pay, and they are crucial to our success as agencies as well. And we don't function without their work and the importance of their work, and the fact that they're not going to receive that back pay, is something that's not really being highlighted in the news clips and in the headlines, and that's something that is going to hurt thousands of families as well.
Yeah, hats off to you and your work for them, Carson. Really appreciate you making the trip in. And we won't forget those janitorial, custodial staff, among other security guards. They will not get back pay from their jobs. So again, thank you very much and good luck to you and your family.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
And Rick, it wasn't just Wilbur Ross, but we've heard from Lara Trump, the president's daughter-in-law. We also heard today from Larry Kudlow. And these dissonant tones, the seeming lack of empathy from the White House, whether it's true or not, certainly is rippling and starting to even bother some Republicans on Capitol Hill.
This is why shutdowns kind of stink from a political perspective. There's no good way to spin the personal harm. And if you try to minimize it, as the administration has tried to do through words as well as deeds, trying to find ways to patch holes and keep the government running, it tends to backfire because it's real and it has a cascading effect. More people are angry about it. The fact that members of Congress are now going to head home for another weekend, hear from constituents. I was just out in Arizona for a couple of days, and even out there, they're offering discounts to federal workers that are affected by this. There are free drinks at a couple of bars. This is really hitting with people, and anyone that gets on a plane knows it, and anyone that depends on government services knows it. And if you try to minimize that, you're minimizing the sacrifice. That's a real sacrifice for 800,000 of your neighbors.
Yeah, and almost 40 days into it, a number of federal workers I know have said, look, we appreciate the free drinks, but we don't want any more free drinks. We want our paychecks back. And Jordan Phelps at the White House, you actually were putting this line of questioning to Larry Kudlow, the president's top economic advisor, a little bit earlier today, asking them if they're actually feeling and empathizing because many in the West Wing there as well are going without pay. What did he have to say?
Yeah, Devin, Larry Kudlow did express empathy for those who are going through this and those hardships that even some on his own staff he acknowledged are facing. But Devin, he similarly made a statement trying to kind of minimize the impact of this, describing it as a glitch. Take a listen.
The moment, the nanosecond, the switch is lifted and the government reopens, all these glitches will go away. And a lot of economists agree with that.
So Kudlow, of course, here is making a case about the broader economy. But Devin, I think we can all agree that this isn't simply a little glitch to those people who are having trouble going paycheck to paycheck. We also know that there are some people in low-income housing at risk of eviction. So it's a lot more than a glitch to those people.
Yeah, no doubt. And we just heard that from Carson. Jordan Phelps, thanks so much for that. Appreciate your reporting. And Rick, we should button up this segment by noting that the Senate did just vote on the second package that we were talking about today, the Democratic proposal to open the government through February 8th. That also went down.
It got more votes than the president's package. Even though the Democrats are in the minority in the Senate, they got more crossover Republicans than Democrats on the other side. And as Trish noted a moment ago, a couple of conservatives, two in particular, hardliners in immigration, voted against both of them. But again, to the point of showing and not just telling, the president now sees in black and white his proposal got less support than the Democratic proposal that was offered by Chuck Schumer and them. If that doesn't force you to the table, I really don't know what does.
Yeah, hopefully it will. This weekend, as you said, they'll be in town negotiating. Hopefully, obviously, in the center of all this, the situation down at the southern border. Our Josh Hoyos has been down there on the Mexican side in Tijuana, Mexico, for the past couple of weeks on and off, talking to people involved in this issue, residents in the area, people caught up in the system. And Josh joins us live now from Tijuana. Josh, give us your perspective from down there. This is unfolding in Washington. What's the situation today on the southern border?
Yeah, it's all happening in real time here, and I think much like as you were speaking to federal employees where their lives are hanging in the balance, people's lives are hanging in the balance on this side. So we're at El Chaparral. This is the border point where people could cross by foot from Mexico into the United States. And back over here is where we've seen people who have been taken by Mexican migration from this point to have their appointment with the U.S. immigration to see if they could possibly enter the United States and seek asylum.
And Josh, one of the things we're learning today from Customs and Border Protection, actually some new numbers out, and I think we have a graphic here. The situation on the southern border has gotten a lot worse just so far this year. The government says that family units apprehended trying to cross up 280% from last year. They said that people trying to cross illegally between ports of entry is up 81% from last year. And we're finding out from the government that most of those immigrants, as you know, Josh, are from Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador. Why are so many of these people making the journey? You're talking to these families, and they just keep coming despite the controversy, despite the threats for a wall, despite the military on the border, the barbed wire. What's really motivating this flow?
You know, it's curious to say that, to think of the threats that would be on the other side of this border, but really they're thinking about what's happening 2,500 miles, 2,000 miles away from this location, their hometowns, the violence that they were facing there, and to them, going through this process is a lot better than staying back at home. I want to show you one thing, Devin. So this location over here, every morning, Mexican migration brings people along and sort of announces the number that says, in the metering system that tells them that they will eventually go see U.S. authorities. So this number right over here is the number that was called, the last number of the day was 1,801. And so if you have any number after that, you're still in a shelter here in Tijuana waiting for your number to get called. And every morning, there's a ride in the morning and ride at night that comes down this area over here and enters people through a Mexican migration gate, puts them in a van and brings them over to another point of entry where they'll hand it over to U.S. officials. And for a lot of the people that we've been talking to, this process being brought in a van, given over to other authorities, that is a lot better than staying at home. And it's something that we've heard time and time again from people, either from Central America or in other cases from other nations.
And before we let you go, Josh, you've also done some reporting on how the Mexicans are handling all this. In fact, as we just noted, most of these migrants coming across seeking asylum in the United States are not Mexican, but the Mexican government has the job of trying to care for, accommodate the humanitarian situation that's building there on the southern side of the border. What are you hearing from Mexican officials? What does the scene look like there?
The Mexican officials are trying to make sense of what is happening. They understand that there are people coming in from Central America and other parts of the world in the hopes that they will be able to get to this location and knock on the door of the United States and ask for asylum. Last night, I was with producer Chris Rios, who's behind the camera right now, and we were at the San Ysidro Port of Entry. So we were on the opposite side, on the American side, where we saw women and children being led out from a holding center. And we spoke to one woman who's actually from the European nation of Armenia. She told us that she, along with her 5-year-old child and 9-year-old daughter, took a flight from Armenia to Moscow to Cancun, and another one from Cancun to Tijuana, so they could possibly plead political asylum and enter into the United States. And they were in a holding center for 3 days at San Ysidro, and they came out completely shell-shocked. I have never personally seen so much fear in the eyes of children, but it's the sacrifice that parents are making, that adults are making to possibly get to the other side.
All right, Josh Hoyos for us down in Tijuana, Mexico. Thanks for bringing those stories to us, Josh. And we know you'll have much more of your reporting on abcnews.com and coming up on Nightline as well. So thanks for that. And Rick, not only a reminder of the human side of this story, but if there's a silver lining in all of this, it's that perhaps both sides, as we've started to see here in Washington, coming together, that they seeming to agree that they do need to spend some serious money on things like shelters for these people. They do need to do some medical care systems for these people. And it's not just about the wall and enforcement, but they do need, Democrats and Republicans are agreeing. I think at the end of the day, when the deal does come out, there will be some money for the things Josh is talking about.
One point on the language of the shutdown and about what's going on at the border that I think is interesting is that if you just ask the question of Democrats and Republicans, is there a crisis on the border? I think they'll agree on Capitol Hill. Yes, there's a crisis. The question of whether it's a security crisis you solve over a wall or a humanitarian crisis that you solve with additional resources and processing capabilities and health care for people that are coming across and status for refugees and dreamers, the crisis mentality is real. The question of a national emergency and whether you need a border wall is still an open one, and it's a big one. But you're right, it has focused a lot of attention on this issue.
And speaking of humanitarian crises south of the border, we were going to bring you today, if you're looking at your right-hand column there in our headlines bar, talk a little bit about the Venezuela crisis. We're hoping to have Senator Marco Rubio join us here. He's running a little bit late, so we'll have him in the next run of the program here. But that crisis still unfolding today, one day after President Trump made the remarkable move, Rick, of deciding to intervene in a foreign crisis that one would think doesn't fit with his America First policy.
Yeah, choosing a side, such as it is. I mean, you have a place that has two rulers, two people in place right now who say two presidents at once. What does Trump think of that? You can imagine that. He's having a hard time dealing with the Speaker of the House. Yeah, it is an uncannily awful situation because of how bad it can revert very quickly. This is a strategically very important country, a part of the world that is very unstable. I've talked to foreign policy experts in the last couple of years that are frankly more worried about Venezuela sometimes than they have been about North Korea because of its proximity and its geopolitical importance. So I didn't think you're right. It was notable that the president found it necessary to intervene in that way when it kind of cuts against what he often says about not wanting to intervene.
And he did have one notable Republican and a couple in his ear on that. Rick Scott from Florida, Marco Rubio from Florida, both pushing for this. Certainly a big win for their influence on this president and getting the President Trump to intervene. So much more to come. Hopefully Marco Rubio will join us here on ABC News Live coming up shortly. Until then, great to have Rick Klein with us as always. I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington. We'll see you next time here in the briefing room.